First come, first served. If anyone wants to make an easy $170, find out Ethel Thurston's middle name. Yes, the pretentious dipshit from EssenceofThought. I'm willing to bet half my rent that it begins with O, cause she's that much of a living caricature of her fellow autism spectrum disorder people. End quote. 23rd of October, 2024. This is monstrous. Don't do this. It shocks me that I have to say that, or at least it shocks a part of me. The other part is the cynical bitch who likes to call herself the misanthropic humanist because there's a segment of humanity which seems absolutely hellbent on disappointing me. Case in point, the people who rush to downplay my stalker offering to pay money for my private information, including those who brought up the number of followers Ruadhán has, as if stalking isn't typically carried out by a lone individual, making said follower count irrelevant. Sadly, as much as I'd like to not have to return to the topic, we have unfinished business, namely some of the accusations levied against me in the very same thread as the one offering the money. Accusations I find serious enough whilst also being outside my purview that they warrant highlighting regardless of their source, just for transparency's sake. That's why we're here, doing this again. But first, a quick content warning for the following: transmisia, Islamisia, ableism, racism, police violence, stalking, sexual harassment, and child sexual abuse. If our work has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so we can keep the channel running. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. I'd also just like to take this time to remind our viewers that the statements made throughout our videos are the opinions of myself, the host, based on the evidence I have available to me. They are not and should not be taken as unquestionable fact, which is why we reference everything, because we're fallible. Thus we try to give you, the viewer, the ability to check all evidence yourself in order to make up your own mind, which is what the reference numbers in the top left corner are for, being numbers that match up with the reference list found in the transcript linked down below. As such, we encourage all viewers to do their own research to reach an informed conclusion about the topic. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and we need to talk about the post shared at the start, namely how it goes on to accuse me of racism, as well as how another one of my stalkers became involved with this entire ordeal. We'll also be discussing the ableism that has been a constant theme throughout this ordeal, and what I'm hoping for in publishing these videos. This is part 2 of what was originally a single video, yet things just kept growing and growing until that was no longer feasible. If you haven't already seen the first video, I suggest going ahead and doing so before watching this one, since I will be referencing stuff we've already covered. I know it's a lot, but stalking and racism are both serious topics, and thus require time and care. Now, before we get to the charges of racism, something I need to nip in the bud is an argument I've heard people make in the past, an argument I vehemently disagree with, and that's this idea that me being married to Udita is intrinsic proof that I cannot be racist. This is flawed reasoning. It's the same argument used by both Milo Yiannopoulos and Matt Dillahunty as a cover for their horrific anti-black racism and transmisia, respectively. The easiest way to demonstrate the flaw in this reasoning is to point out the fact that the overwhelming majority of misogynists are cishet men. That is to say, cis men romantically and sexually interested in women. Being willing to date or even marry a person does not necessitate genuine respect. Abusive relationships, including ones in which the abuser leverages bigotry against their victim, are horrifically commonplace. Therefore, whilst I appreciate the thought, I do need to be upfront in shutting down this line of argument. I lose absolutely nothing in pointing this out, since I feel that my actions in the past speak for themselves. That said, I do still want to take a look at some of these specific charges levied against me and cover what happened in context, hopefully allowing you, my audience, particularly my Indian and Black audiences, the ability to make a decision for yourself. That's all we've ever done with regards to the people we've exposed in the past. It'd be hypocritical of me not to do the same here.
Hey, Udita here. I just wanted to address the fact that following the publishing of the previous video on Ruadhán stalking, which went out on the 18th of December, he's taken to accusing Ethel of using me as a shield multiple times. This is in spite of the fact that Ethel has not brought me up until now. And I know this video came out after Ruadhán's comments, but on screen right now is a video of Ethel showing how the draft for this section was already written by the 16th of November. And here's my comment about that section, posted on the 21st of November, a month before Ruadhán's comments. So not only is Ruadhán making these slanderous assertions without evidence, using me as a token, but if anything, the screenshots prove that Ethel's actions behind the scenes demonstrate the exact opposite. So Ruadhán, if you're watching this, shut the fuck up. Stop infantilizing me as this weak-mounted brown girl who can't advocate for herself, and keep my mention out of your creepy mouth. It's fucking racist and misogynist. Also, what's up with the whole Ethel came out as bi and trans after meeting me at university in order to reinvent herself as a victim? Neither is true, by the way. I mean, not that it would mean anything if she had come out after we'd met. But the whole faking it for clout thing is straight out of the far-right playbook and is horrifically bimissic and transmissic. Anyway, back to Ethel.
Starting with Ruadhán's own accusation of racism, as seen in the following screed. Quote, I know you've had a hard life, but I don't think you care as much about the left-wing principles you claim as you want others to think you care about them. Like, let's take that anecdote of yours about being harassed in a queue for the ladies' lavvy. Why did you think it was so important to point out that the man who attacked you was screaming at me in Hindi, as you literally said? Pal, you've been living in India for something in the area of a decade, if I remember correctly. You've been living in India as a white person, and one with an accent of the kingdom that ruled over India, which ended less than a century ago. Why did you find that man's language, his first language, the non-English language of his native country, so important to stress, while you tangent in your scripted video, begging your target audience for their sympathies? Like, goddamn, you at least allow the dipshit kids who take you seriously to believe your anti-imperialism, but then you make sure they know that a scary brown man whose native language is Hindi, ergo whose country, where they live, has a history of English colonialism that only ended in global living memory, was the aggressor in the experience you described. There was no reason for you to point that out except for racism. End quote. Ruadhán then returns to this point later in his thread, asserting that, quote, and don't think you can dry away with but immigrant, cause Ethel, you're smart enough to know that not all immigration is equal, and no one cares how your mother's first language is Dutch either. I know what the Anglo-Dutch Treaty is. You're descended of nations who colonized India for a long-ass time. It means something when you script a video that includes retelling a time you were harassed by a male official over public lavvy access in India, and you find it somehow relevant to stress that the man was screaming at you in Hindi. You described an experience of transphobia, but you decided to use racism to accentuate your sense of terror within that experience. Says a lot about you, none of it good. Shrugging emoji. End quote. For transparency, here is a section in question taken from our video Rachel Oates Promotes Far-Right and Anti-Feminist Figures, in which I was debunking the idea that I, as a non-binary person, have never suffered systemic violence. To give one example I've talked about on the channel before, I've had guards with assault rifles yell at me because I am non-binary and try to appear androgynous. Every fucking subway, mall, and cinema in India has security similar to that found in airports in the West. You literally put any bags you have through an X-ray machine before stepping through a metal detector, and sadly, those lines are gendered and there is no line for non-binary people. Now, I prefer to use the women's line, but don't have a trans certificate because I haven't legally changed the gender marker on my UK passport, which would allow me to apply for one. Why? Because I don't know how doing so would impact both my marriage to Udita and subsequent spousal visa, since India does not recognise same-gender marriages. So, if I change my gender marker to one I'm more comfortable with, I risk being separated from the woman I love. So really, I have no choice but to use the male line every fucking time. Yet, due to my androgynous appearance and due to being a white foreigner, some men staffing the men's queue think I'm a foreign woman who simply doesn't realise that I should be in the women's line. Now, far from being flattering, it is fucking terrifying when a security guard with a rifle slung on his back starts barking orders at you in Hindi, leading you to freeze, fully aware as his equally armed friend is taking an interest in you from behind the bomb screen. This shit got so bad that I stopped travelling via the metro in 2018, only booking taxis, which cost at least 10 times as much, limiting how much I, as a non-binary person, could afford to go out. As discussed in the previous video, we lived in a really shitty area from 2017 to 2019, meaning I didn't feel safe walking around where we lived, so I was effectively trapped inside my own home, not coming down for weeks at a time. All because I couldn't fucking deal with the fear every time I wanted to use public transport. If I was a passing trans woman, I could just use the women's queue, but I'm not, meaning I face a very specific form of systemic violence in day-to-day life. Starting with something relatively minor, this discussed an incident in the metro, not a bathroom. Ruadhán seems to have blended the metro incident with the one I talk about immediately after, in which a sexual predator singled me out because I'm non-binary and attempted to profile me, including which bathroom I used, in order to figure out where it'd be easiest to sexually assault me. These are not the same cases, I just wanted to clear that up. I also think it shows just how little attention Ruadhán actually paid to what I said, underscoring just how little care they have for the issue themselves, revealing their flagrant hypocrisy. Second, I literally specified that this was why I stopped taking the metro in 2018. For context, I arrived in India for the first time in September of 2017. So no, I hadn't been here for in the area of a decade, I'd been here for less than a year. Third, I didn't yell that the man was screaming at me in Hindi. Keep in mind that Ruadhán put this in quotes twice before stating that I literally said, presenting this as an actual verbatim quote. Back in reality, I calmly noted that the police officer barked orders at me in Hindi and put emphasis where it belongs, on the fucking rifle. The reason I mention the fact that the orders were issued in Hindi is rather simple. Whilst I do know some Hindi and can generally get an understanding of what someone is trying to tell me, that part of my brain shuts the fuck down when multiple firearms are involved. I get that Ruadhán's an American and guns might be commonplace for him, but the only time I've seen firearms in person are in museums and high traffic areas immediately after a terror attack. I also just have general anxiety as an autistic person with PTSD, anxiety exacerbated by being on unfamiliar ground, meaning I have to put in extra effort when trying to understand a language which is new to me. Because this isn't the only time I've had issues. I've had similar anxiety in Stavanger Airport in Norway, albeit to a lesser degree, not due to anyone's nationality, but due to the lack of visible firearms. I really cannot keep stressing that fact enough. Not only was this guard a cop, but an armed cop. And yeah, that was scary in the moment. I get that I'm white, but I'm also an autistic person who works in human rights. Like, I've seen the videos, I know what can happen when cops with guns start barking orders, even when those orders are barked in their victim's first language. Also, I think it's better to be specific rather than generic. Besides, there is no doubt in my mind that Ruadhán would be attacking me had I said something such as non-English, or God forbid, a foreign language. And fair enough, that would have been racist since it's not a foreign language, it is one of India's native languages. But I didn't say that, I was specific about the details. Speaking of India's hundreds of languages, we need to discuss the racism seen in Ruadhán's presentation of Hindi as the non-English language of his native country, i.e. India. Hindi is not merely one of hundreds of distinct languages, it is only one of 22 major languages. One of those is Sanskrit, the root language for many of the others that is also used in many religious practices, with the other 21 being Assamese, Bangla, Bodo, Dogri, Gujarati, Hindi, Kashmiri, Kannada, Konkani, Maithili, Malayalam, Manipuri, Marathi, Nepali, Oriya, Punjabi, Tamil, Telugu, Santali, Sindhi, and Urdu. Implying that Hindi alone is the native language of India and that all Indians speak/understand it is racist. In checking the script, Udita reminded me that she herself struggles with Hindi as a Bengali since it is not her mother tongue, and she is not alone in this. Yet to make things even worse, Ruadhán has stepped on a cultural landmine in how, at least from the perspective of many of the other parts of India, North India is to India what England is to the British Isles. North India has a fascist problem in that there is a sizable portion of people seeking to impose Hindi as India's national language, much to the exclusion of all others. This is referred to as Hindi imposition or Hindi imperialism and is part of a wider effort to bring about Hindustan, a fascist wet dream in which all Muslims are eradicated, only a specific brand of Hinduism survives, everyone is a strict vegetarian, and Hindi is the sole surviving language. Now, as with any attempt to eradicate native cultures, there is resistance, both to the imposition of Hindi as the national language and everything else that's smuggled in with it. One of the cultures most vocal about said resistance, particularly when it comes to dietary restrictions, is Bengali, the culture Udita belongs to. As the popular saying goes, there is nothing quite as lonely as the vegetarian section at a Bengali wedding. The thing that really got me as I put together this video is the fact that I found out that Ruadhán cares about the Celtic languages, specifically Welsh. Which is great, he should. It's horrific what the English government has done to the main native languages of the British Isles. But it's a little on the nose to defend Welsh from English imperialism whilst openly promoting that very same homogenization within a nation consisting of more than 1.4 billion people, acting as if they all share one unified language. And in case you're thinking that I'm the one projecting what the English did to the Celtic languages onto what is happening in India, here's a post by Stop Hindi Imposition, which consists of a chart showing the eradication of the Celtic languages across the British Isles, published on the 6th of October, weeks before Ruadhán's post. I'm not the only one to comment on said mirroring. To further reinforce this, Udita linked me to a video published mere days before she checked over the script, depicting the following incident on the Kolkata metro.
You are in India. West Bengal is a part of India. You must be learning Hindi. This lift is not yours. The metro is not yours. West Bengal is not yours. West Bengal, metro,
To be clear, Kolkata is the state capital of West Bengal. This North Indian woman travelled to West Bengal, entered the metro, and thought it would be a good idea to start going after passengers for speaking Bangla, their mother tongue. This entire thing reminds me of the 2016 incident in which an Englishman on a bus in Wales heard a woman in a niqab speaking to her son in a language other than English and proceeded to yell at them that when you're in the UK, you should really be speaking English. At which point an elderly woman in front of the man turned around and yelled back, "She's in Wales and she's speaking Welsh." This hypocrisy on Ruadhán's part, how he's willing to erase hundreds of spoken languages in a desperate bid to win an internet argument, defending a cop and bolstering Indian fascism, shows how he only cares about the preservation of languages when they're languages spoken by predominantly white people. Ruadhán sees all other languages to be entirely disposable. We also see this hypocrisy in how Ruadhán calls me a descendant of colonial powers, which is true, but completely ignores how he is a white European currently occupying Turtle Island. At least I'm in India on their terms, having applied for numerous visas and eventually my overseas citizenship of India. So that's the first charge of racism made against me. I'm not going to assert things either way. That's not my place as a white person. I just wanted to bring it to your attention so that you can make your own decision, particularly if you're one of my Indian viewers. Moving on to the second accusation, it's actually sandwiched between the two quotes seen in the previous accusation, with Ruadhán asserting that, quote, "This isn't the first time that racism has been extremely low on your priorities. See at 6 minutes into this one, where you, Ethel, derail a convo about racism to go on about pedos." End quote. Ruadhán then links to a video published by Ozwald Martin, my second stalker, titled Essence of Problems, My Critique of Essence of Thought. The relevant section is 558 to 858 if you'd like to check exactly what was said for yourself via the mirrored copy. Thankfully, the incident in question was the one and only time I have ever interacted with Martin, so by covering his history of stalking and harassment, that will double up as a presentation of the evidence on my actions, allowing you to decide whether or not they were racist. So the incident began on a thread posted to Twitter on the 2nd of October 2021, in which Martin quote tweeted someone sharing a video that apparently showed Ian Kaczynski, better known as Vorsh, saying something racist. Martin claimed that the clip had been taken out of context, before ending his thread by tagging me as an example of how to properly reference. For context, Kaczynski's history of defending images sexualizing minors was well known at that time, just like the fact that he had a Twitter account upon which he routinely liked and shared such images. At the same time, I am an open survivor of child rape. This is one of the facts my audience is generally aware of, since I have worn it on my sleeve for over a decade now, bringing it up throughout my advocacy for victims of sexual violence. Suffice to say, being tagged in a post defending Kaczynski, effectively being made an accessory to his crimes, felt incredibly violating. That is why, once I'd calmed down enough from an anxiety spike, about 3 hours later, I very explicitly told Martin that, quote, "This thread makes me really uncomfortable, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't pull this shit again." A lot of what Vorsh says, such as his claims that child porn should be legal, can never have a right context, and statements like these suggest otherwise. Same for his racism, transphobia, ableism, etc. There's nothing to excuse this sort of behaviour, so stop giving that myth power. Don't get me wrong, referencing does help and should be the norm for political discussions, just not for the reasons you're claiming. The post you retweeted is gone, so I can't tell if that's one of these instances, but yeah, I don't want to be tagged into a thread about giving this pro-child raping shitbag the benefit of the doubt. Hope you can appreciate. End quote. Kind of a mess, reading it back now, but I was being very open with how I was feeling at that moment. Nowhere did I say that Martin or anyone else can't talk about these things, merely that I didn't want to be tagged in posts defending a racist pedophile. That's racism, at least according to these two white dudes. What's especially frustrating is that I was very open about the fact that the original post had already been flagged, because that was beside the point. Whether or not this one clip had been taken out of context is immaterial to the bigger picture. On top of his constant use of racist slurs, Kaczynski has a well-documented history of racism, particularly anti-black racism, most notably how he has openly lied about black creators in an attempt to rally a lynch mob to chase them off the internet. There is no context in which any of this behavior is okay, and I rebuke the notion that we should waste our limited time and resources constantly running defense for known racists. Which is another thing worth pointing out. The way Ruadhán worded things in his 2024 post made it sound like I came at Martin for trying to hold a racist accountable, choosing to instead focus on a pedophile, when no, the racist and the pedophile are the same person. I told someone defending a racist pedophile to leave me the fuck alone since I wanted no part in said heinous act, explicitly stating that there can never be a right context in which Kaczynski's racism and pedophilia are acceptable. It also bears mentioning that Ruadhán is, of course, a massive Kaczynski fan. We saw that in the last video in how it was Ruadhán's post to Kaczynski's subreddit, mocking the PTSD of trauma survivors in our server that led me to ban him, which is when he began stalking me. I believe this is also why he mockingly wrote pedo the way he did in his 2024 thread, acting as if Kaczynski didn't leak the contents of his personal files last year, files containing dozens of images sexualizing children. So, considering Kaczynski's known history of anti-black racism, for Martin and Ruadhán to try and accuse me of being racist in refusing to be invoked to defend him under any circumstances, it's certainly a choice. But that's what the second charge of racism is about. That's what they mean when they say that I derailed a conversation about racism. I'll let you, particularly my black audience members, the people most often targeted by Kaczynski's racism, to decide things for yourself. But since we're here and are already talking about boundaries, we might as well discuss how Martin tagging me into a post defending a racist pedophile spiraled into him trying to force me into a relationship beyond the parasocial one he'd clearly formed, believing that he has some right to force further interaction between us. Returning to our first and only interaction, Martin seemed to understand my complaint at first, leading him to apologize. Sadly, that didn't last. The next day he changed his mind and began posting non-stop about me, comparing me setting boundaries to people sending him death threats, implying I'd bullied him because he's autistic, and claiming I'd made him suicidal. Seeing his emotional abuse and manipulation for what it was, I blocked him, wanting absolutely nothing to do with him and his sickening behavior. Martin realized I'd blocked him and began tagging Levi as an indirect way to get at me, feigning an apology once again, not caring that my block of him was a very clear declaration that I was not interested in engaging. When Levi refused to act as a middleman, he went back to accusing me. Frustrated about the entire thing, I took to Twitter, venting and stating that, quote, I told a cis ally that tagging me into a post defending a supporter of child porn made me, a survivor of CSA, extremely uncomfortable. He proceeded to compare me setting boundaries to receiving death threats. That's all it takes for allies to present trans femmes as dangerous. End quote. This was, of course, post-2019, meaning there was a lot of trauma being torn into here, a lot of old wounds being reopened. I felt powerless. Once again, me expressing myself in the face of violence was being used to demonize me. Martin would later return whilst we were publishing our series of exposés on Lily Orchard in 2022, with said creep seeing a golden opportunity to force the conversation to be about him. Martin would publish a series of videos, each being deleted before the next came out, making it look like it only ever made one. The first was EssenceofThought Lies to You, in which Martin supported Patch's manipulation and exploitation of Glade. Patch was one of Lily's first known victims and someone who had agreed with me in labeling Lily Orchard's behavior as parasocial grooming, only to flip when their predatory friend, Jessica Bryce, also known as Trans Girl Therapist, Poppy, and Lady Diabolique, came out against the idea, mostly to spite us because we put the victim's safety first, meaning Poppy couldn't exploit them for her own personal ends. Shortly after we shared Glade's testimony, Patch approached him under false pretenses, asking him if he had a fundraiser to share, which he understandably did. Patch then used that link as a cheap talking point to accuse myself and Levi of neglecting Glade by failing to boost his fundraiser. In actuality, we'd all agreed on taking money out of the equation, specifically the ad money from the testimony videos, which is why it went to charity. We did this to avoid tainting the testimony, as we feared that Lily Orchard and her defenders would claim that Glade was doing it for the money. Because of this basic principle, I, personally, didn't think to follow up with a GoFundMe, as that'd kinda defeat the purpose. Yet, rather than asking Glade how he felt about that or calling us out in private, Patch went ahead and presented themselves as the person speaking up for Glade, even though Glade never consented to that and was actually upset as a direct result. Patch did not care that, in doing what they did, they opened Glade up to increased scrutiny and violence, since he could now be accused of doing it for the money. This is on top of the violence that Patch themselves had chosen to inflict on Glade. Again, approaching him under false pretenses, violating his trust and speaking over him as Lee Orchard's victim. After Levi alerted him to Patch's thread, Glade realized that he had been manipulated and volunteered screenshots of Patch poaching said information. Upon seeing the full extent of the manipulation, Levi offered to publish a rebuke on Glade's behalf, which he gratefully accepted. In the subsequent call-out, Levi noted how Patch had acted against Glade's consent. Seeing as the genie was no longer in the bottle, we updated the description to include Glade's GoFundMe, since if he was going to be accused anyway, thanks to Patch, he might as well be accused and get some additional support. That's what Martin's first video was in support of, deceiving a victim of child sexual abuse, speaking over them, jeopardizing their testimony, and using them to forward a personal grudge, all whilst pretending to be their one true advocate. The second video was EssenceofThought sexually harassed Lily Orchard, in which Martin mocks the fact that Lily Orchard was sexually harassing myself and her other critics by constantly telling her audience that we wanted to rape her, all as a means of sexually degrading us. This is quite literally a textbook definition of sexual harassment. It is not okay to sexually degrade people, especially your critics. Martin, meanwhile, did not even attempt to show how I'd apparently sexually harassed Lily Orchard. The closest he came was asserting that other people had done so and that I'd failed to acknowledge it, meaning it was just a cheap title designed to capitalize off of Lily Orchard's victims. The third video was Essence of Problems, my critique of EssenceofThought, which is the one Ruadhán referenced in his post. To give you an idea of just how disgusting and exploitative of child sexual violence Martin is, I'd like to play you the following clip.
When I noticed that one of their latest uploads was accusing Lily Orchard of racism, I was all like, holy shit, what's going on here? And that pretty much brings us up to date. That segment on Lily's racism was so bad that it made me reconsider why I hated Lily Orchard.
So, a white guy with a known history of defending racist pedophiles didn't understand my section on Lily Orchard's racism, therefore, that made him doubt whether Lily Orchard, a serial child predator, was a terrible person. I feel the need to stress this point in particular, seeing as how it relates to Martin's main quibble with how I set my boundaries in 2021.
This isn't to say that Ethel was wholly wrong, though. She set out to establish a boundary, but she could have done so without calling me a child rape apologist. Especially when you consider I hadn't said anything about sexual abuse of any kind.
I didn't call him a child rape apologist, I merely acknowledged the fact that he was, at that very point in time, defending a known racist pedophile. That said, seeing as how he attempted to derail actual attempts to get justice for victims of child grooming and abuse, going so far as to openly state that his ignorance of racism made him want to ignore said child abuse, I'm done with his bullshit. Ozwald Martin, you are a child rape apologist. An allegation he's not defeating in buddying up to Ephraim, someone who lied about the legal viability of victim testimony in a sad attempt to undermine Lily Orchard's victims, a fact Martin himself confessed to knowing.
Now, Ephraim did cast doubt onto Glade's testimony. He did this both in the video and his argument with Ethel. For those of you wondering, Glade is the first victim. Personally, I think the testimonials are the only things in Ethel's victim testimony videos that are worth actually watching.
On top of declaring all victim testimony hearsay, Ephraim promoted the pseudoscientific false memory myth using a shoddy reading of Wikipedia as his source, ignoring how that very same wiki entry noted that, quote, false memory syndrome is not listed as a psychiatric illness in any medical manuals, including the ICD-11 or the DSM-5. End quote. Ephraim even showed the offending line on screen, displaying how he hadn't even read his own cited source on the matter. For those that don't know, so-called false memory syndrome was a myth created by the wife of a pedophile to preemptively discredit their own two daughters, neither of whom had gone public about what their father had done to them, which was then adopted by sexual predators. This included the Catholic Church, who famously called in Paul R. McHugh, a devout Catholic and board member of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, to come in and discredit the thousands of child rape cases that were emerging around the millennium. Now, in spite of me dragging Ephraim for this, with Ephraim's then editor, Yopal Gao, responding, posting a screenshot of said post, so I know they saw it, crying about being called out as a rape apologist for promoting rape apologist propaganda, the offending video remains up without any update to the description, detailing the pseudoscientific nature of what he is presenting. This is important to note since Martin pretends like Ephraim apologized and fixed things, when no such thing happened. No apology was given to Glade, and his video pumping out rape apologist propaganda remains public, misinforming everyone who watches it. Suffice to say, the harm was already done and continues to be done to this very day, as seen in the screenshot taken on the 15th of January 2025, more than 2 years after I pointed out said pseudoscience. In spite of this, Martin felt comfortable enough buddying up with him that, when Ephraim responded to a post claiming that trans women were simulating periods with tomato paste by stating that, quote, I totally believe this without question, end quote, Martin responded with, quote, careful, EOT might see this and try to spin a narrative about how transphobic you are because of it, end quote. Now, I can't tell if Ephraim was being sarcastic here or not, as I genuinely feel it could go either way. The point I'm getting at is the fact that Martin is right at home, working alongside people he himself acknowledged as having sought to undermine the testimonies given by victims of child grooming, casting doubt on all victim testimonies, the one piece of evidence most victims have. There's also the way that, just like Ruadhán in the previous video, Martin was trying to force conversations I was not involved in any way to be about me. It didn't matter that I was platforming Lily Orchard's victims who had been neglected by the wider community, ensuring that their voices were heard before donating the money from said testimony videos to help fellow victims of violence, all Martin saw was a golden opportunity to capitalize. Ozwald Martin isn't just a child rape apologist, he's a child victim exploiter. Yet I stayed silent. Martin wasn't getting much traction, and I was talking with Orchard's victims about how they'd like me to move forward, letting them guide me. That's why I ignored certain people, including Martin, at the time. Which is when Martin began posting to our victim testimony videos, demanding an apology for 2021. So I blocked him. He then followed me to Tumblr, so I blocked him again. And that was the end of 2023. Sadly, as I got ready to move on with the channel in mid-2024, to move away from exposés of child predators or people who would abuse me personally, generally looking to start a new chapter in life, Martin began commenting again, this time from a different account. So I blocked that account. Which is when he sent me an email, still demanding an apology, still flagrantly circumventing every block I'd put up. Now, I need to be clear about the facts that I understand that he was criticizing me in his videos. That, on its own, would have been permissible. Yes, he lied and engaged in rape apologetics, that is his right, just as it is my right to ignore liars and rape apologists. Unlike certain other creators, I understand that I'm on the internet and that not everyone is going to like me or say things I agree with. Where it crossed the line into stalking and harassment, however, is when he kept forcing his way around my block. Me blocking him, repeatedly, was about as clear a no as one could give, without me explicitly stating it, giving him the interaction he wants to force from me, yet he kept coming at me, kept trying to force me to interact with him directly, trying to force me into a relationship beyond the parasocial one he'd very clearly formed. Something else I realized whilst editing this video is that in his 2021 message to Levi, Martin very explicitly stated that, quote, I don't want to bypass their block, but I would like to make sure Ethel is okay, end quote. So he knows block evading is wrong, he can't claim ignorance on this for whatever fucking reason, he knows it's wrong, he stated such himself, yet he's chosen to terrorize me for years. This was stalking as well as a clear demonstration that Ozwald Martin doesn't understand basic consent. Which really isn't a shocker, all things considered. What was a shock was discovering that Ruadhán and Martin have begun communicating with one another, with Ruadhán posting down to the comments of the latest video, defending Ethel and the time she told her audience to create fake profiles to infiltrate and fracture black communities online. Ruadhán's defense, she later realized that she'd said this on camera, and like Trump readying for his 2021 coup, said a single line as a disclaimer to distract from the wider context. So, another flagrant display of racism, one which Martin was only too happy to support. Part of me wonders how Martin will respond to discovering that Ruadhán is a Kaczynski fan, seeing as Martin has ostensibly made a show of telling Kaczynski's fanbase to stay away. I doubt he'll do anything, I think he mostly said this as a means to compare me to a racist pedophile, but hey, maybe I can fracture their two-person party. Because I'm 90% sure that Martin is the second member of EOT survivors. But yeah, that's the problem with Martin thus far, spawned from a single interaction in which I told him that it was triggering to be tagged in a post defending a racist pedophile. Hopefully by exposing these creeps to the light, they'll get the message to leave me the fuck alone. Again, they were free to criticize me at a distance, but that's not what they are doing. They are offering money for my private information whilst trying to force me to interact with them directly. The last thing I want to comment on is Ruadhán's never-ending ableism, including the horrific forced labeling of me as someone with autism spectrum disorder. This is not a label I have ever use for myself in any of my work, mostly because it reeks of Nazi eugenics. Being autistic is not a disorder. It is a natural variance that has been stigmatized, marginalized, and oppressed by neurotypicals, and it's gross of Ruadhán to try and force me to exist within the confines of such a violent system. And that's before we even get to Ruadhán's support for ableist stereotypes of autistic people. Sadly, this is just one of several examples of blatant and unflinching ableism. From labeling me a narcissist, othering people with personality disorders whilst armchair diagnosing me, to mocking people with PTSD, Ruadhán seems to practically run on ableism. Again, returning to my initial reply on Reddit, this was the one thing I criticized him over, making my disappointment clear. Expanding on that, if you're a part of my audience and yet willingly engage in ableism, then you're not a part of anything. You're a bigoted leech. Ableism has become the last resort for people who don't have any sort of argument. They know that it's a bigotry few people push back on, and that if they appropriate a few technical terms, such as narcissist, chucking them out there in discussion, that predisposes people to view whoever they're attacking in a negative light. It's a sad fact that society has synonymized narcissist with abuser, when in reality, the vast majority of abusers are neurotypical folk. Point is, the people who abuse said prejudice, on top of being raging bigots, show a distinct lack of conviction every time they resort to such methods. If someone is doing something harmful, focus on the harm. As for what I'm hoping from these videos, my main objective is to flag the issue and make sure that everyone understands that I am aware of it and that this is not okay. As stated at the start of the first video, I don't want people to take my silence up until this point as a tacit admission that I'm okay being stalked and harassed like this. I also just want to warn people who might know things about me to be on the lookout for any suspicious behavior. If someone slides up to you and begins asking questions, maybe be a little more careful with what you say. There are people out there conspiring against me, all because I had the audacity to protect my community and set boundaries as a survivor of child rape. For those wondering, I have reported the post offering money for my private information, only for Elon Musk to come out in support of it, so I'm not expecting anything to happen there. I don't want to engage with the local police's online division. They were incredibly dehumanizing the last time I was forced to engage with them, asking me about my genital status as a trans person as if that was relevant, and I had zero confidence that they'll actually do anything. That's why speaking out like this really is my only option. As for Ruadhán and Martin, not that I think they'll have made it this far, I don't want an apology from either of you. I don't want you to see this as another opportunity to force me to acknowledge and engage with you. You've gone beyond the moral event horizon, at least to me personally. If you have any semblance of a moral conscience, you'll just silently delete your accounts, and that will be the end of it. That's the only course of action I'll accept at this point as a genuine acknowledgement that your actions, as documented across these two videos, are heinous. Whilst I was fine with you criticizing me on your own platforms, before the stalking, you don't get to link back to doing that after you've been called out on your violent behaviour. You destroyed that goodwill. And wouldn't you know it, it seems Martin got scared after we published our previous video on Ruadhán, leading him to preemptively publish an apology the week after we finished this script. Not because he's genuinely sorry for his stalking, he can't even bring himself to admit that that's what he's doing.
Like, I don't want to be that guy to invalidate how you feel about it. Like, if you feel that this is stalking, then I apologize for my stalkery behavior.
So he's made it my fault for feeling stalked and not his fault for, making every conceivable effort to circumvent my block of him. It's ironic that, in saying he doesn't want to invalidate my feelings, he's done exactly that, along with denying everything he's put me through. No one says this to someone whose feelings are completely justified. No, this isn't an apology. The only reason he made this video was in the hopes that it will give him some sort of moral high ground that will force me to apologize to him for setting boundaries. So a transaction. If there's still any doubt in your mind that none of this is genuine, you should know that he still has the video up in which he suggests doubting Lily Orchard's harmful behaviour, presumably including her child sex abuse, just because he didn't understand my criticisms of her racism. He also has the audacity to tell me that if I don't apologise, he's not going away.
I literally just want an apology. You know what I mean? That's all I want. If you don't want to apologize, then whatever. Okay, fine. But this kind of situation, it's not, like, either A, it's not going to go away at all, or B, it's only going to go away when somebody decides to be at all civil, and I feel like I am currently in a position where I can try and extend that olive branch.
An olive branch is a fascinating choice of words. Do you know what an olive branch is? It's an offer of peace. How exactly is Martin bringing peace to my life by telling me that he won't go away until I do exactly what he wants? You're not supposed to use an olive branch to beat someone into submission. I take his words as a threat that he's going to continue stalking me unless I capitulate and give up my boundaries, which would just empower him to stalk me in new ways. No. The only way this ends now is with option C. He deletes all his social media accounts and fucks off. His apology video is no less manipulative than anything else he put out there. He's constantly framing himself as this uber-woo soft boy on grounds of neurodivergence, seemingly believing that excuses the terror he and his buddy have put me through over the years. When I saw him threatening to continue, I had to take an SOS psych med and an antihistamine just to stop my hands from eating themselves. Fact is, myself and Levi are both neurodivergent, yet we don't stalk people. We criticize public figures, which everyone has the right to do, but we don't try to force them to talk to us or apologize, not even when we have evidence of them committing crimes against us. Remember that Martin has stalked me for all these years just because he felt like I was impolite to him once. You know what else myself and Levi don't do? We don't set out to discredit victims of sexual abuse because tearing down someone who ignored us is somehow more important than recognizing a confirmed pedophile. That is not okay behavior. That has taken Martin over the moral event horizon, and I'd be the first to metaphorically cut any rope he's still holding onto. Let the bastard fall. I don't want to do any more of these videos. They take so fucking much out of me each and every time. I just want to get back to the stuff we've been putting out since last September. That said, I'm not sure if I'll be given the chance. Though, if you still appreciate what we do here and want to help keep the channel running, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Super Thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Goddess a Lighter, Socialite Wayne Six Denials, Flynn, and Higgins the Seagull. And for myself, Udita, and Levi, take care now.